Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. If you consider yourself a beginner or intermediate Android developer who now not only wants to get a job in 2024, but an above average job that pays you well, that is enjoyable, that has a nice working environment, has nice teammates, then you have to do things above average developers do. In this video, I will put together a clear action plan for all of you who are very hungry and committed to get that dream job, who are not satisfied with just an average job. And this video is maybe a little bit longer, but this might be the single most important video you can watch for this year, because I will share all my core advice that I would give my younger self to learn Android as efficiently as possible, to avoid running into roadblocks which just cost you a lot of time and frustrate you, and to finally get the job you want. And this video will be structured in 3 parts. First, you need to learn what you actually need to learn, so the technical topics you need for a job as a native Android developer. Then you need to learn how you learn these technical topics in the most efficient way possible. And lastly, which is very important and often ignored, you have to learn how you take this technical knowledge and sell it to companies so they really understand your true value as a developer. And when I share the topics here you have to know, then I will start from absolute beginner level, and then we will improve step by step and become more advanced. So if you already know some topics I share here, then that's great. You can make a check and start with the topics that you don't feel confident about yet. Are you ready? Let's go. Okay, so starting with the technical topics. What are really the technical topics for native Android development you have to know in order to get an above average job? First of all, for all the topics that I will share here, you really don't have to become an expert in, at least not before you get that job. Instead, I'm a fan of sticking to the Pareto principle. So that says that you can learn 80% of a topic in just 20% of the time, and the remaining 20% of the topic take up 80% of the time. So before you pick a niche to deep dive into, it makes a lot more sense to first learn all the 80% of the important topics in 20% of the time, because that's just how you get the most possible learning output in the least time. And the very first thing you have to learn before you can start in any way with Android is just Kotlin. I seriously still get questions whether you should learn Java for Android in 2024. Seriously, if you use Java for Android development in 2024, you are absolutely lost. Sorry, but that is really the truth. When I started my YouTube channel here 5 years ago, Android was already Kotlin first, and I can't believe that people still ask me that after 5 years of Kotlin first development for Android. And I know some people will also say, hey Philip, my company actually still uses Java. I need to learn that for that company. But then my question is, if that company is really that far behind in technologies, do you want to really work at that company? Because in the end, here we want to learn how you get your dream job, how you get the job you really want, and not all these trash jobs out there. So how do you now learn Kotlin? Of course, with my Kotlin Newbie to Pro playlist. I will link all playlists that I mentioned here in this video down below. You can just watch this on YouTube. It is an older playlist, but especially about things like programming languages, these really don't get outdated, since programming languages themselves and the syntax doesn't really change much. And then next, learn about UI building for Android. And nowadays, you could do that either with XML or Jetpack Compose. And in 2024, my clear recommendation is to learn Jetpack Compose. And no matter if you like it or not, it is simply the future of Android development, and whoever denies that really lives under a rock. And no, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn XML at some point, but definitely focus on Compose first, since that is the clear direction native Android moves into. And to learn UI building with Jetpack Compose, I have a playlist as well, which I'll also link down below. Okay, so now you know Kotlin, you know how to build Android UIs. What comes next? Next, you have to learn the Android basics. And with Android basics, I mean every core concept that is really unique to Android development. So here I mean things like activities, the activity lifecycle, fragments, the context, what is a view model in Android development, what are broadcasts, what are services, what is work manager, all these kinds of Android basics which are unique to the Android operating system. And good news for you, I already packaged all these important concepts into one playlist, which I'll again link down below. Okay, so Kotlin, UI building with Jetpack Compose, Android basics. Next up, you need to learn about asynchronous programming. So asynchronous programming means how you make your app execute blocking stuff like a network call that could take a little moment, like executing database queries, just things that take a bit to not block your app. And how you can just make use of parallel computing to execute multiple things much faster together. And on Android nowadays, that works with coroutines and flows. And again, don't get too deep into these. Coroutines and flows can be very complex if you deep dive into them. But for now, really just learn what these are and how you can use these for simple calls. And again, for both coroutines and flows, I will link playlists of mine down below. And at this point, now you know everything you really need to know to build simple projects. And that is really the most important advice I can give here. From this point on, only learn by building projects. Since just because you know how every single piece of a project works individually, that does by no way mean that you understand how all that is wired together in a project in practice. And the first thing you could build is a simple calculator app. So really, no navigation, no fancy architecture, no fancy design patterns, just an app that does something and has a fine UI. And from this point on, you can gradually improve and build slightly more complex projects over time. So the next project could, for example, be a simple to-do app, because if you learn this way by building projects, you will really quickly notice which topics really matter in practice. Because let's say you build that to-do app and at some point you get the problem, okay, I actually have a list of to-do items and I need to kind of save these, because if I restart the app, they are gone. Then that is the point where you start researching about how do you really save such to-do items persistently on a device, and you will stumble over databases, for example. So you will learn how databases are implemented, and you will automatically learn that by implementing that in real practice, in a real practical project. And then if you are able to persistently save such to-do items, you might stumble over the next problem. You might notice, okay, I actually have 2 screens in this app. How do I now get from the first screen to the second screen? That's the point where you start to research about navigation. So you might ask ChatGPT, hey, how do I implement navigation in Jetpack Compose? You could also Google that, but just do some research on your own based on the problems you face while building projects. Because if you have that approach of learning, you can't learn things that are unnecessary, because if they were unnecessary, you wouldn't need them in your project. And that way you really just build project after project after project until you really feel confident about the process of building such an app. And once you are already able to build basic apps that involve a database, that involve a remote API, then that is the point where you can start to put more focus on your code style. But before that, it's really not necessary, because I really see this all the time, that people just start learning Android and the first things they learn is dependency injection, MVVM, how do I structure my architecture, what is clean architecture, and all that's cool, but you don't need to learn that as a beginner. First of all, you need to learn how an app really works, how things are wired together, that it at least does something. If you're just learning to build an app, you don't yet need to worry about how to structure your code that other people can work on it, or how you structure your code so that it's testable. At this point, you have nothing to do with testing yet. So just build something that you get these feelings of success, that you have an app you can show to your mom, that you can show to your dad or your friend, and just be proud of that, just enjoying the process. I think that is much more important at this point of learning, when you just build hobby projects anyways. Of course, yes, in the industry, in a real job environment, code style is something that is super crucial, that is very important, but just learn that after you already build some basic apps. Because at this point, you already build some apps with a potentially bad code style, and then you better understand why a good code style is really good and how that would have made your previous projects more scalable and more maintainable. And what do I mean by code style? So with code style, I mean everything in regards to architecture. So what do you need to do? How do you need to structure your code so that it scales, that it's maintainable, that other people can easily work on different parts of your code base? I mean things like common design patterns. So something like dependency injection, the factory pattern, singletons. Then solid principles are very important, and understanding why these solid principles actually improve your code style in most of the cases. But from this point on, you really just go on with building hobby projects where each new project just teaches you something new. So if you first build a to-do app and then build a note app, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, since the features of both of these are very similar. Since both these involve a database, both these have maybe a list and a detail screen, both these have the same functions for the database, so the only real difference is that the one saves notes and the other one saves to-dos. Instead, what would make a lot more sense after building that to-do app is, for example, building an app that requires a login system. That's a new feature, something new you can learn. Or an app that maybe requires the device's camera, something like a QR scanner. Or an app that maybe recognizes some sort of popular landmarks. And I really don't want to give you too specific steps here about which project to build, because it's all about you enjoying the process. And it's about putting your ideas into reality, because that is what makes programming really enjoyable. We just have a thought in our mind and we can really turn that into reality. We can turn that into an app that actually helps people in the real world. So whatever you want to build, if it sounds cool to you, if it is doable as a hobby project, of course, go for it, build it, enjoy the process, and you will notice that you will learn much faster on the one hand, but also don't even notice how fast you learn because you enjoy this whole thing. So if you now really learn these topics that I talked about here, on the one hand with my videos at first to just get a first understanding of Android, but then also with ChatGPT if you need to learn something new, or with Google, and then just putting everything together in functioning projects, then you have a really good technical foundation for the job world out there. And also if you do that, if you build multiple apps that all have different features, that all maybe have a somewhat okay architecture, you don't believe how much ahead you are already of other people. Because what most developers really do is they just graduate and then they hope for a six-figure job. But seriously, you have to earn these jobs. It's not like the hiring manager will knock on your door and tell you, hey, do you want a six-figure job? No, you have to first put in the work, you have to show that you have what it takes for such a job, and then you can get that job. And before we now get to how you take this technical knowledge and sell it to companies so that they really understand your true value as a developer, I want to share a last clear recommendation. If you are short on money, but you have plenty of time, then the best thing for you is just to learn with free videos, with free resources. It's all out there. You just need to spend more time learning everything, since you somehow lack that clear structure and you don't really have anybody who tells you how it's done right. But if you're short on time, however, and you maybe only have 1 or 2 hours a day to learn Android concepts, and be ready to invest money into your education. Being ready to invest some money into really good coding courses or mentorships has 2 big advantages. On the one hand, you are much more motivated to actually learn the topics that are taught in the course on the mentorship, because you kind of want to have that return of investment for your money. But second, you get to learn so much faster, because in the end, we can only learn from mistakes we make if we know about the mistakes we make. If you're just learning on your own, you don't have any idea about the mistakes you make until one of these backfires. And backfiring could mean they cause a big mess in your project. Backfiring could mean they make you fail an interview, or in the worst case, backfiring could mean that they make you lose your job. And in that long while, until a mistake backfires, you have no chance to learn from them, because you simply don't know about the mistakes you make. But if you have someone who mentors you, then that mentor can tell you immediately when you made a mistake, so you don't really need to get to the point where the mistake backfires, but rather just learn from it in the moment where the mentor tells you. And if you're lucky, you have someone in your close circle who could be that mentor for you, but if not, finding someone is definitely the fastest way to learn. If you like my teaching style, then you'll also find my mentorship program in this video's description. At the point of where I record this video, the next mentoring round will start in only 2 weeks. And yes, it's not free, and in fact does cost quite a bit more than my coding courses, but if getting to a well-paid job is your #1 priority, this is the right thing for you. Okay, now to summarize, what are really the prerequisites for you to get a good job? On the technical side, of course, all the Android basics I shared here for all the videos I've linked down below. Then definitely local databases, remote APIs, implementing a solid architecture that is scalable, and a big bonus is definitely testing. That is not mandatory for all jobs, but it's definitely a big bonus which not many people actually know, but it's still a skill that is widely needed and applied. But apart from these technical skills, you also need a really strong portfolio of at least 2 to 3 projects that are well written and look nice. And guess what? These are the projects you've built while learning Android. So these projects should show that you have the technical skills that I just went over, because otherwise it'll be very hard to prove that you have these skills to your future employer. So how does a strong portfolio really look like? The absolute minimum is a well-maintained GitHub page which features these top 3 projects. And here it's most important to understand that your portfolio won't be inspected in all its detail from the beginning on. No, people don't have time. People will scan your portfolio. They will go on the link, they will scroll down, they won't read every single word that stands on it, and especially they won't go into every single code file inspecting how it looks like. So when the project is scanned by a hiring manager, for example, they need to immediately see what the project is about and which problem the app solves. So if all someone really sees is a blank GitHub page with your project structure, don't expect them to look into that. No, instead, what I always encourage people to do is to add a well-structured README file to your GitHub repositories, which breaks down in a nicely formatted way what your app does, how it does that, and especially how it looks like. So just add some screenshots, add how this app looks, add some bullet points, what it does, what the problem solves, and format it nicely. Because only if that README file looks really good and someone is interested in that project, then they will take a closer look at your coding style. And if you want to go the extra mile, then building a website can also make sense for a portfolio. Just have nice visuals on that website. You have a bit more space and a bit more possibilities to actually show off what you know, show off what you've built, skills. So if you're into website building and you have some time, then that definitely also makes sense to think about. Now let's get to the last and most ignored part of this video. But you know, back then when I started freelancing, I just got out of university. I had an okay understanding of Android, so that was okay, but I wasn't super advanced. I simply just lacked real world experience, which is of course completely normal if you get out of university. However, one of the first freelance jobs I actually got was a senior position, and at that point I have never even worked as a junior before. And by no means did I know what a senior should have known at that point. But what I luckily understood quite early is that what counts much more than actually having the true hard skills, the technical skills a senior should have, is if you can sell yourself as a senior. So as I can see, the reality is that coding skills alone don't get you a job. What gets you a job are proper soft skills that allow you to sell your hard skills, your coding skills. And here I really know what I'm talking about, because I've also hired people from various fields. And when you're suddenly in the hiring perspective, you start to realize what really matters when getting a job. And technical skills are of course important, but you need to be able to sell them. You have to convince the hiring manager that you are a better fit than other applicants. And of course this field of soft skills and personal development is gigantic. I could go on for months here probably. But just that you get a little feeling for, I want to go over a few pretty important skills and tell you what it really means to sell yourself. Because I mention that quite often now, but how do you really sell yourself? So that refers to things like, how do you present yourself in a conversation? How do you talk to someone? Can you articulate yourself well? How do you write? I was recently actually looking for a technical writer on Instagram, which is a job that just requires attention to detail. So just someone who writes technical articles for me. And you don't believe how many people who approached me misspelled my name. And misspelling a name is of course something that can happen. I also misspelled names in the past, and it's not a big thing, or at least we think that it's not a big thing. But if someone misspells my name in the context of applying as a technical writer, where that attention to detail is really important, I already went to the next participant without even taking a look at the actual hard skills of that person. Because I was like, okay, if that person can't even type off my name, which was actually just above, how will the articles be that this person writes? Will that person also be so inattentive for these articles? Will there also be spelling mistakes all over the place, which I always have to go over and correct for every single thing? But if an applicant for this technical writer job instead sounded very professional in the first message, with a nice grammar, with no spelling issues, then that is a completely different impression you make, and suddenly your hard skills will be inspected. But in the first level, it's always your soft skills. But apart from selling yourself, soft skills also include things like emotional intelligence. So kind of being able to read people, being able to understand their emotions, how they feel, even if they don't explicitly tell you. And honestly, establishing such soft skills is something that definitely does not happen overnight. But here's what really helped me the most to get better at these. First, you need to start reading books about such relevant skills. And then you need to take the knowledge you learn in these books and apply that in your everyday life. And just to give you a few recommendations so you know what I mean here, the first one is Surrounded by Idiots. This is a book that will help you to understand what kind of personality types there are, and also being able to estimate what kind of personality type another person actually kind of fits into. And that other person could be potentially your boss or hiring manager you're talking to when you want your dream job. So in that situation, when you maybe have your interview, then it matters a lot to get a feeling for what kind of person your hiring manager is. For example, is it rather a red person? So red in the context of this book would mean very dominant, very pushy, driven by achievement. Or is it maybe a blue person? Blue means very analytical, logical, likes numbers. Because with each of these types, you have to talk completely differently. Because if your potential future boss is a very dominant and pushy person, you will better convince them of yourself if you tell them how much you will help them to advance the company, how much you will help them to destroy the competition and just make more money in the end. But on the other hand, if it's maybe a more analytical and logical person, you'll rather convince them if you tell them how much you will help them to maybe improve their core metrics, improve their KPIs, improve user retention for their app, how you maybe minimize error rates, because these people love numbers, and if you tell them you will improve their numbers, they are convinced. That's of course quite a generalization here. There is much more to this topic, but I really just want to give you an understanding of why these things matter and why it's not just about learning how native Android works, how Kotlin works, about staying up to date in a technical sense. No, it's also about working on yourself as the developer. And just to give you another suggestion for a book, which is about the art of persuasion, so the psychology of convincing someone to do something, like for example hiring you, and the clear recommendation here is the book Influence: The Psychology of persuasion. This book will teach you many core principles how our human mind works, which you can use to your advantage to convince people. And none of these books that I told you here will directly tell you how you now get your job. All these are really just single puzzle pieces you still have to put together for your individual situation, but if you do that, they are extremely helpful. So I think this now made my point a bit more clear what I mean with soft skills. Of course, there are tons of more books you can read, tons of more topics that I didn't cover here, but I think we can summarize this here as: don't just be that weird coder who sits in their basement all day, having absolutely no contact to the outside world. No, instead become someone who works on themselves, someone who's just fun to hang around with, someone who others love to work with. You will realize how your life will turn around. And yes, of course, all that takes a lot of work. Reading takes a lot of time, applying these principles in the real world takes a lot of courage sometimes, but that is just how the real world works. If you want to get above average things, you also have to do things above average people do. And maybe just a few last words on what I would now recommend to do to actually approach companies. So obviously, if you have the technical skills, if you have the portfolio, if you have the soft skills, then you still need to find companies and apply to these. But here it's really secondary where you find these, whether that's via a job portal, whether that's via LinkedIn, whether that's your own network, that is really secondary. But just as one last tip, before you apply to a company, research about it. Learn what it does, learn what kind of problem their product solves or their service. Brainstorm how you specifically can provide value to that company, how you can help them make their product or service better, how you can help them drive more sales, because that is the only reason a company hires you. If you would cost them more money than you would bring them long term, they would not hire you. So again, if you want an exceptional job, you have to do things exceptional people do, and that is learning more than university teaches you, because that is the level most of your competitors have, that is going the extra mile as I described here, and that is just doing what other people are too lazy for. Alright, that's all I got to say. I hope you enjoyed this, and now sit down and put in the work.